Ora abbiamo il momento di Q&A. Io richiamo sul palco Neil Gershenfeld, domande per tutti, da tutti. Prego Neil, come here with us. Join me on the stage for the Q&A session. So this is just a brand new story. I mean, Italian Fab Labs are just blossoming all over.
Yeah, the energy is wonderful. In leading into the questions, last year at the World Economic Forum, which is where heads of state and CEOs gather, we set up a Fab Lab. And what I found interesting in the meeting was all of the heads of state and CEOs were depressed because nothing was working. But there are also the makers who were there and the grassroots activists, and they were really excited because stuff's working. And so in a sense, what's happening here in this meeting today and in Italy and in Rome and all these places is, sort of giving up on top-down, the governments and the companies fixing it, and inventing new governance, a whole new economy. And from the bottom, it's really exciting. So this was wonderful to hear.
Any advice for them? For them, are there? Any advice in the way they should run a Fab Lab?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say a couple kinds of advice. One is, the power is the network. One Fab Lab isn't a critical mass. In the network comes propagating knowledge, connections to people, investments, all of that. And so becoming part of a network rather than in isolation is one piece, which I think you're all doing as displayed by gathering here. Another is the whole idea of a Fab Lab is to have the whole range of capabilities I described, so anything you can make in any lab. And so the challenge is to really, you should be able to do 2D, 3D, logic, sensing, actuation, form, function, all the things I described, you want to really have all of those capabilities.
Okay.
Then I'd say challenge number 3, which is where you come in, is take this morning. The ambassador and this, the ministers saying, okay, sure, this sounds like something we should invest. They need a vehicle. They can't work with each of you individually. You have to figure out how to package yourself so that they can make money flow into it. And so creating an organization that, what I love is the chaos and the entropy of the Fab Labs, but you need to sort of create a package that money can flow through. And that's where the role of the kind of Fab Foundation is, to provide the logistics for it. And maybe one final comment, which is why this was so much fun for me. MIT is effective because the people there are strange. Inventive people sort of don't behave well. And what I love about Fab Labs is the most inventive people are sort of at the edges of society, and Fab Labs create places where they fit. And so that's the strength, but you do need sort of wrappers around it. You need people who can figure out how companies can invest and all of that. And so building the organization, launching the Fab Foundation Italia, building that capacity is really important.
Okay.
Yeah, so questions?
Ok. Thank you. E allora vediamo, in prima fila voglio vedere Stefano Micelli. Tocca a te. Hai una cosa da dire, Neil? Stefano, alzati, prego. Lui è il professore, tra l'altro, che per primo in Italia si è occupato di queste cose, ha scritto un libro meraviglioso, si chiama Futuro Artigiano. Stefano, un'impressione su quello che ha detto Neil? Una domanda per lui?
Devo fare una domanda in
Se vuoi, sì, come vuoi tu, è anche italiano.
Neil,
Yep.
I think the question is for you.
Yeah, in English or Italian?
Yeah, in italiano and then I'll
Yeah.
translate it in
Yeah.
English. Neil, le esperienze dei Fab Lab italiani, devo dire, mi hanno colpito per il loro sforzo di adattare un modello di tipo così, scientifico americano al contesto italiano. Questo mi è sembrato l'esercizio più originale che ho visto in alcune delle esperienze fatte. Qual è il tuo consiglio, la tua indicazione per portare in Italia, nella patria del design, della moda, strumenti che all'MIT hanno molto di scientifico e di tecnologico?
Ok, vai. Ok, Neil.
Well, yeah, again, not MIT, but Mainframes, mini computers, hobbyist computers, PCs. When PCs were invented, computer companies said, oh, that's a toy. They're all bankrupt. When the PC was invented, the computer companies were Wang, Prime, Data General, DEC, they all failed because of the PC killed them. The only one that survived was IBM, and it transformed its business. So today, big industry in trouble, and then you saw today this energy of this maker movement. You could look at that from industry and say, oh, it's a toy, it doesn't scale, but it's precisely the analog to the PC. What the people in this room are inventing is a new economy. And it scales not because you mass produce in a remote factory, but you locally produce. And that's as transformative as personal computing. So this isn't just play or prototyping, it's an entirely new economy. And so the jobs, I really don't believe, are going to come back to where they used to be. The decaying factories are going to decay. What's in this room is a new economy, and it does everything you want. You saw displayed the design sense, the innovation, the initiative. I think the right thing to do on the large scale is really the infrastructure. To take the Barcelona example, you expect the city to provide sewer and power, and you expect the city to have a library for books. Now you should expect the city to provide tools for invention. What you can do from the top down is invest in the infrastructure that lets this work from the bottom up, and then let go. The power of this is it's chaotic, and it's distributed, and it's not managed top down, but from the top down you can invest in the infrastructure that makes it possible. Access to the tools, just some of the mechanics, like where do you source the materials or how do you account. Creating the infrastructure to empower it. And then in turn, a core competence in Italy is a sense of style and design, and that's what this is all about. This is the new industry. So I think it's a really great opportunity.
Bene, allora se ci sono altre domande intanto ne prendo una, ecco, ne vedo una là, intanto Francesco Gaglietti, alzati Francesco, Global Shapers, anche in inglese secondo me tu fai, no?
Thank you for having us. A question that we are discussing internally at the Global Shapers community here in Rome, part of the World Economic Forum, is about policy. So as production evolves, changes, and as a hobby and a passion morphs, or has the potential to morph into business, how will policies change? So take taxation, for example. Think of the goods you're going to produce and how these goods will be traded and exchanged. How will you tax them? I mean, is that consumption tax? Is that royalties? Is that what's going to change in policies? And so that I know that's no easy question, but thank you.
Yeah. So I can tell you a few things. Oh, I don't need to wear this to talk. I can tell you a few things I do know, and then a lot of things I don't know, and ask you about those. So. One change is intellectual property is not protectable. It doesn't mean there aren't businesses, but traditional intellectual property assumes there's a barrier to infringement that you can enforce. And if anybody can make any of these designs, you can't protect IP like you used to. But we've gone through that with software, and we've gone through that with music, so that's one difference. Another difference we've seen is most people assume the economic impact is you make and sell a thing. But remember, the only computer company that survived was IBM, and it became a services business. And Google doesn't sell search, it's an advertising company. One of the things we see is many of the most successful business models in Fab Labs are services. One of my favorite labs is in Detroit, where they take kids in jail and young girls who are pregnant and teach them to make stuff. And what happens is it transforms their lives. They engage in society, they go on to learn more, they have a much better life outcome, and what the lab sells is, as a social service, the transformation of the life of the children. And there's many different examples like that where you don't sell the things you make, you sell the benefits of making it, is a second observation. But zooming out from those examples, again, today you go to a school to learn. A traditional job is you go to a place to work. And going to a factory means you get paid to do something you don't want to do for somebody you don't know, far away. Then you go somewhere else to play. In the labs you saw, you can do all of that at once. And if you look at the success of, for example, technology clusters like Kendall Square, where MIT and Harvard are, or Silicon Valley, live, work, play are all kind of smushed together. And one of the strengths of this is you don't rigidly separate learning, living, working, playing. They all get mixed together. But what that means is it really challenges the model of traditional education. Because here, education is done in networks, and it's strongly project-based, and it's collaborative. It's a very different educational model. It really challenges the traditional model of business, where you don't design a product and mass produce it, but you ship data and produce it on demand and customize it. It challenges the whole notion of aid. The Fab Lab in Lima started because Spain was doing aid, and Vicente had the idea of bring bright kids from Peru, teach them in Barcelona, and then give them a lab as a very different way to think about aid. All of those things kind of get turned on their side. And to do that, what's hard is inventing new organizations. So again, this is like the moment when the internet is being invented, but we're inventing this sort of internet of physical things. And the challenge I'd give you all is to realize this doesn't fit in traditional business or traditional education or any of those things. It's really inventing sort of new ways to live and work. And so I can't answer your question. That's the project. The project is, if anybody can make anything, how do you live, work, and play? We don't know the answers. That's what sort of the pioneers here are figuring out, building those new structures. And that's hard. We found inventing the new organizations is much harder than inventing the technology. And that's the kind of meta project over all of this. So my answer is that's the question. That's the question before all of us. Yeah.
Ultima domanda. Intanto Massimo, vedo che si è messo la maglietta. Sei pronto per il gran finale? Ci tocca fare la fondazione, sentito? Ci ha dato i compiti. Neil, c'era una domanda, prego, a te. Ti do questo?
Pronto?
Vai.
Sì, io volevo fare una domanda da profano, visto che mi trovo qui a questo evento, ma non sono un maker, sono un ospite. Volevo fare una domanda sulla sostenibilità del progetto Fab Lab. Cioè, quali prospettive per la sostenibilità offre Fab Lab come organizzazione? Grazie.
So, on the one hand, most Fab Labs struggle for funding. On the other hand, almost all of them survive and have survived for many years. And what's emerging for sustainability isn't one answer, it's many different answers. So a beginning answer is, well, we'll have a Fab Lab, we'll make products and sell it. And you can do it, and you saw some examples, but that's hard. Instead, what's emerging are many different models, and the labs do kind of all of them. So I gave the example in Detroit, where one of the things they're selling is a social service of transforming lives. And they've found they can pay for a lab in a year and a half. In a year and a half, they bought and paid for a whole lab based on how much money was spent on kids in jail. They take the funding on dealing with kids in jail and they spend it more effectively and document it. And so that's one of their models. One of the models in Barcelona is education, selling knowledge from the lab. A lab in Afghanistan built a citywide internet, and now that's running in Kenya, where there what you sell is information connectivity. The model in Barcelona that's interesting is you don't ask your town library what is its business model. The library is part of being civilized. And so what Barcelona is doing is it's not worrying as much about what's the business model in the lab, but if you go to the lab and they consider IKEA the enemy, because IKEA far away figures out what you want, makes it and ships it to a big store. If you go to the lab and make your own furniture, even if there's no financial transaction, it means the economy stayed in the city. And so there, the sustainability model isn't in the lab, it's the question of the whole economy of the city learning to make what it consumed. And so part of my answer is there are many, many different models of sustainability, and Manchester or Amsterdam, they do all of them. No one of them is enough, but the mix, it's a challenge, but it's the mix is the first part. And the second part is almost all these models of sustainability don't work for an isolated lab. They all involve the power of the network. You have to be part of the network to have the educational platform and the commercial platform, and all of that is the second part of the sustainability. But it's a deep question, and again, the mistake is to narrowly equate it to
C'è una base
selling
musicale alla
products.
fine.
What you want to
No,
sell
quando
is
saliamo,
economic
mettiamo due richiamati sul
impact,
palco.
which often doesn't simply mean selling products.
Ok, allora, risposte esaurienti direi, no? Chiaro. Ci sono altre domande? Un'altra lì, prendiamone un'altra. Prego, se ti presenti anche col nome.
Sì, mi chiamo Carmine, sono anch'io un ospite.
Sono
Sono Carmine, anch'io sono un ospite e la domanda che mi viene da porre è questa. Questa produzione localizzata e quindi insomma diciamo l'abbandono del modello centralizzato con la produzione di massa, come è compatibile con il rispetto delle norme e quindi insomma se la produzione all'interno di una fabbrica rispetta determinate norme e questo garantisce la qualità dei beni che escono da quella fabbrica. Una produzione così delocalizzata come potrebbe gestire la compliance a tutte le norme che di fatto mantengono il sistema economico, che in America costituisce barriere d'ingresso, ma così in tanti altri paesi? Grazie.
Okay. So first part is if you look at software, originally it was written by Microsoft and IBM. You know, there was free software, anybody did anything. What's settled is there's a whole ecology of markets of software. Music was originally the labels, Napster came and you don't pay anybody. Now we have a whole ecology of software. So first part of the answer is there will still be mass production, but mass production will make boring things because it makes the things everybody wants the same. There'll be mid-scale regional production, which will be somewhat custom, and then there'll be completely custom local production. What this will create isn't simply mass production goes away, but it's going to create all these new scales that didn't exist before. So it's not one versus the other, but it's opening up this range. Now, in the US, for example, we've been working with the Department of Homeland Security, who's frightened by your question. How do you deal with safety and security and all of that with the stuff? And again, we can't answer that. That's a question, not an answer. But what we've seen with the analogs, for example, with software, is the best way to handle that is by having benefits to opt in. So if you opt in to compliance, you benefit by getting access, for example, to platforms to sell your products, or you benefit by getting investment in your products. In the same way, you can write viruses, but if you allow Google to check your software, you get the benefits of selling through their app store. And so what's emerging as an answer is you don't make rules to prevent bad stuff because you can't control it in this world. But what you can do is make incentives to make good stuff. So you benefit by doing that. And in fact, related to that question is the whole 3D printing guns story. And that's really silly. And it's silly because we don't have much trouble with people making weapons in fab labs because there's no trouble getting weapons anywhere in the world. There's a great supply chain for weapons. That's not an unmet need. And if you want to make a gun, it's been true for a long time, it's easy to make guns, and a 3D printer is a terrible way to make a gun. You know, it's just an artifact of the strange press coverage. So hurting people generally hasn't been a problem in a fab lab because there's lots of good ways to hurt people already. It lets you do something other than hurt people, which is why these labs have been flourishing in things like conflict zones. So what's emerging is giving people incentives to opt in as a reason to to learn about safety and security and all of that. And again, that involves building a whole new notion of how you regulate, a whole new kind of organizational structure. It's not command and control, it's incentivizing. Okay.
Ultima, ti do il microfono, vieni qua. Ce l'hai già? No. Vai, a te.
Salve. I Fab Lab devono seguire un modello di business, oppure devono assolvere la funzione di istruzione e generazione di prototipazione rapida o costruzione semplicemente?
Right. So that's an important question to end on. All labs that fabricate aren't fab labs. The Fab Lab network really runs as a network. So one piece is, as a community, managing this evolving set of capabilities that reflects the evolving technology and distributing that in the network. And then in return for that, the labs participate in this larger network. And one of the things that's emerged from that, to your question, is Fab Charter, which is a very lightweight notion of rights and responsibilities. Things like you can have any business model you want, but you can't hide information. You want people to learn from what you're doing. And you give back to the network in ways that you benefit from the network. There's no one intellectual property policy, but there's a very lightweight notion of sort of rights and responsibilities that's just enough to let the labs interoperate. So there's no particular, another important notion is you can have time for businesses and schools and all of that, but as Eddie described, it's very important there are a time where people can come in without paying to learn about it. So just this general notion of rights and responsibilities helps for interoperability across the network, but there's no particular rule for businesses or IP. There's a wide range of those. Okay? This was a pleasure for me.
Okay.
I love what's happening here.
Can you stay for Massimo, vieni qua. Okay, first we promise you to make a foundation, a Fab Lab Foundation.
Okay?
Second, we invite you formally to join us in Rome for the Maker Faire in October.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
And my challenge to all of you is the big meetings aren't going to save Italy. You're going to save Italy.
Oh, thank you.
So,
They're going to save Italy, thank you. And allora,
okay.
dietro la Maker Faire di Roma, con me e Massimo c'è una grande squadra al lavoro e io li vorrei chiamare tutti sul palco, perché da adesso in poi si fa sul serio, si diventa operativi. Ursula, Sara, Massimiliano, vieni Massimiliano, il direttore generale di Asset Camera, Ursula che ha organizzato questo evento in maniera mirabile, Sara Ranieri, Giuseppe Tripaldi, Costantino, dove sei? Vieni Costantino, qui ci siamo persi. Prego, venite anche voi che siete un pezzo, non possiamo fare la Maker Faire senza i Fab Lab italiani. E su questo vi salutiamo, anche, ecco, Adil Gesheff con la maglietta, niente di meglio. Per favore Giorgio Olivero, venite tutti su. Alice che sta per ripartire col camper. E allora, questa è la squadra, un pezzo della squadra, non vedo Gianluca Dettori, ma sarà da qualche parte, Luca Librenti, un pezzo della squadra che sta provando a portare la Maker Faire a Roma, ma non è soltanto la Maker Faire a Roma, provare a raccontare che un altro mondo è possibile. Grazie a tutti voi, buona serata.